Welcome to the Bringing Up Business podcast, where we talk about business and parenting. I am your host, Kaila Sachse, owner of marketing and creative agency Humari Digital, and I am a mom of a toddler. I'm excited to chat with today's guest, Nikolai Paquin. He has an amazing eye for branding, and he is a creative director turned solopreneur, YouTuber, and digital product creator who helps creatives, creators, and entrepreneurs turn their knowledge into income by teaching them systems to launch their personal brands. Nikolai, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. That was an awesome intro.
Ooh, I'll take it. Cool. Thanks. So tell our listeners about your journey with self-employment. How did it start? Where are you now?
So I've been running my own design agency for the last 5 years. I opened it in 2020 because I really had no other option.
Yeah.
I graduated college with a design degree in 2019, and it just happened to be the job market was so bad, and there really was not many openings for junior designers at that point, that I said, instead of going and finding something else, which is most of the people I graduated with ended up going into other fields besides design, branding, that I said, let's give a shot doing it on my own and see where I land. And it ended up being the best decision of my life. So
what are some of the fields that your colleagues went into? I'm curious. I mean, if you're studying design, where do you go?
I mean, because of COVID and the pandemic and everything, I think everybody was going for anything they could do. So I know some people who went, had family that worked in construction that went back to doing that. That was actually an option for me because my father owns a construction company. I had other friends, their families own restaurants or they had been waitressing before, so they went back to that. So really everything under the sun. I think most of the people who didn't end up going into design maybe swapped to something more in marketing. I know one girl who she started as a branding designer, but now she's a merchandise coordinator for Death Wish Coffee. So it was kind of an adjacent parallel. She's not doing design, but she's doing the facilitation of designers creating the designs for different merchandise that coffee company makes.
That makes sense. Yeah.
I think as a whole, it really, because of the timing, it's, whatever is paying the bills right now because student loan payments are starting to come back.
Oh my goodness, the student loans. Can we talk about that for a second? How has that affected you and your entrepreneurial journey? Because on one hand, you are expressing yourself through your solopreneurship, but also you have these student loans to pay off. I mean, how have you been managing that?
Actually, it has not been a problem for me at all. I'd say I'm the exception because I stayed at a local college, and the first year I stayed room and board, but after that I went back home, commuted to save money. I only graduated with, I think, $26,000 in debt. And because of COVID and the forbearance that they had, I was able to pay off that $26,000 within, I think, a year and a half or 2 years of exiting college. I mean, most people didn't have to pay student loans, I think, up until 2023. I may be wrong on that, but it wasn't until like the last year and a half or so that they went back to getting rid of that COVID era forbearance or, whatever it was called.
Yeah. That would be really smart to ride whatever wave you possibly can, right? If there's the forbearance, you can more aggressively pay down your loan without the additional interest accrual. Was there anything that you did financially to help set yourself up for an aggressive payoff? Because a year and a half or 2 years, you said, is really fast. That's very, very fast.
Well, the benefit of when I graduated and having a family that allowed me to stay home was I was able to stay, after I graduated school. So like the timeline was I graduated in 2019. For that first year from 19 to 2020, I went back to working with my father, doing carpentry work and construction. And then after I kind of figured out, okay, this is next to impossible to get a job in the design field as a junior during COVID, that's when I started freelancing while still living with my parents. And it was about a year into freelancing and running my business that then I finally moved out with my now girlfriend, and we've been living together for the last 4 years at this point. So I think it was having that safety net, being young, having a family that could still have me live at home and being able to ride that out through one of the toughest points in, recent memory of the economy, that helped me out to where I was able to save all that money up. But again, with any business, especially freelance, you have your high times and your low times. And I think that 2020 period was a boom for most creatives and designers, especially going freelance, because all these companies had to now come on and they didn't have websites, they had marketing, they didn't have paid ads.
Yeah.
So it really was a gold rush that I luckily was able to ride for, 2020 up until this last year, really just looking at the snowball of people saying, okay, I've been running this olive oil company or whatever company for 30 years. I need to now get online and figure this all out. So the generation that was just coming out of college in that era in the early 2020s. I don't even know if I could say that yet because it's only 2025. But they were able to grow off of that. So
Yeah, it's really smart. It sounds like you utilized your resources in an intelligent way. You said, okay, I'm living at home with my parents. I'm assuming rent free or maybe low rent. Some parents do charge their children rent,
yeah,
which is fine.
it was rent free. It was rent free with the clause of you are doing everything in your power to set yourself up for the next chapter of your life. If I was
Yes.
just sitting around, drinking, playing video games, whatever, it would not have gone that way. But the fact that
Right.
I was on sales calls in my childhood bedroom trying to figure out how to be an adult and make money, and at the same time that everybody was navigating the world shutting down, it ended up being a good thing.
That's brilliant. You're taking advantage of the time that here's the deal. The clock is going to keep ticking, right? You can either choose
Yes.
to sit back and not do anything, like you say, drinking, playing video games, whatever, or you can get out there into the world however you possibly can. During COVID, that meant you had
Mhm.
to hop online or hop on the phone
Yeah.
and network and hustle, try to get out there. So it's really cool that you utilize that resource.
Hmm.
It's funny. I have a similar story. I paid off my student loans similarly. I was also living rent free, but I was doing it as a property manager on site for a 21 unit apartment complex.
Okay.
And my then boyfriend, now husband, and I negotiated a
Hmm.
deal with the building owner to say, hey, we'll manage your building rent free plus a small stipend every
Hmm.
month. And that, gosh, if I could go back and save even more money, I would. It unlocked an entirely new way to pay off my car note because I was silly enough to purchase a new car when I was 20 years old.
Hmm.
My semi don't recommend that. And also pay off my student loans aggressively. And so
Hmm.
similarly, I was able to erase that debt and move forward with the next chapter of my life. It's good on you for also taking advantage of a situation where you were living rent free and then able to save a lot of money and spend to pay off your student loans early. So,
Uh-huh.
so that said, okay, I picture you have zero student debt and now you're going into freelancing. So I can see how you would have possibly more capital to play with. Did you use that in any way to market your business, or what did that look like?
I think for me, I've never had a problem with money, but I've always had the fear of running out of money. So I
Yeah.
try to do everything as cheap as possible. And when I started my business in 2020, it wasn't by any means the first time I had been freelancing. So all through college, I would just do small jobs here and there, like, hey, design a t-shirt, or hey, we need a flyer for this. Not anything that was more than a couple $100s a month, if that. But, in 2020, that was like, okay, I now need to replace a full-time income that I've never had and figure out this whole thing, figure out how to pay taxes. So my perception around money was, okay, I'm starting from zero. There's only a way to go up from here. I don't have a whole lot of money to invest. So I was just cold emailing, going to businesses, really just any means to get business in the door for free. And I think the big thing for me, my social media presence isn't the same as it was 5 years ago, but it was just making case studies on Instagram when Reels first came out, or TikTok, and really just doing a quick and dirty breakdown of here's a brand that I designed, and having a 30-second video, and that caught the eye of a couple of people. And then I was able to turn those initial clients into kind of a referral machine where I really didn't need to market my business for the last 4.5 years, because I was able to find a couple good clients that had a network of business owners they knew, because they were business owners who were 40 plus, 50 plus. And, they were pillars in their community, and it was just, you do good work and you over deliver, but under promise. And
Yes.
then ththose other people will come back and just say, okay, I have a guy who's really good at this. let's see if we can use him for this or that. And it just snowballed from there. So I don't think I spent any money marketing myself. The only money that went into my business the first 6 months of doing it was getting a website through Wix, which I used that for 4 years. My website now is on Webflow, but Wix was a great place to start. And I think it was $300 for the year. That included invoicing software and a good no code tool for building a website, and then just posting on social media using my iPhone at the time, as cheap as I could, honestly.
Yes. Honestly, what I'm hearing from you is the story of somebody who is scrappy. And we like
Hmm.
scrappy because here's the deal. When you have buckets and buckets of money to play with, you might not necessarily be making the smartest marketing and business decisions,
Yeah.
right? I can see somebody who has buckets and buckets of money just spending and wasting it on avenues that don't work, right? But
Yeah.
when you're limited by your capital, you are forced to take an honest view of your business and say, okay, this is where I'm at. This is where I want to go. What is actually going to get me there? And it's not saying that every single avenue that you explore in marketing is going to work, right? Because some of
Hmm.
it is trial and error and getting to better understand your market and how to speak to them. But when you are limited, you're forced to make smarter decisions. So long and the short,
Exactly.
it sounds like you were working with what you had, and
Hmm.
that was the best you could do. And that's exactly what I recommend to my clients too. Hey,
Hmm.
don't go too crazy on these big ideas. Just start with one. Start with
Hmm.
one, keep it simple. Will it work? Let's find out. If it works, great. Let's move on to step number 2. So just step by step.
Yeah. I think the
Yeah.
biggest thing to note as well is and I deal with this a lot with branding clients, is that
Mhm.
they, as you're saying, they have these big ideas, but they don't know how to construct an MVP. And that's very much what I dealt with. Was It's like you go to design school and they teach you how to design a logo and like design branding, but they don't teach you how to market yourself. At least the program I went to didn't teach you how to market yourself, how to sell to people, how to create an offer and provide that to people. And I feel like, yes, you can be really good at the design portion of it, but if you don't understand why you're doing the marketing and the graphic design, then how you design things isn't going to actually convert later down the line. And I don't know if that was just a shortcoming of the school I went to, which ironically it's closed now, but college I went to closed last year because of debt issues. But it was one of those things that it's like, okay, if you're going to teach that in a design program, why don't you teach that to the students as well? That any marketing or creative person should have a background in business as well. So they understand, okay, if I'm making an ad for Facebook, why do things have to be laid out this way? And why do we have to do 10 different variations of this for A/B testing for different markets? Once
Right.
you start understanding that as a designer, you become a lot more valuable in the long run, because I think all of us in the design field have seen just in the last couple of weeks with technology and the capability to outsource. You can hire somebody on Upwork in India or China or any country, and they can do the work manually for 1/8 of what we cost in the United States. Or you can have a business owner go buy a $20 subscription to ChatGPT now, and you don't need illustrators anymore for t-shirt designs. Yes, if you want something very specific, but to people who are savvy new business owners, they can go and do this stuff all themselves to cut out the middlemen, more or less. I still advocate that every business should have a brand strategist and a designer and, people who are experts in their craft. But if you don't have the money and you're just trying to do an MVP, and you can't afford all these experts that are charging high ticket offers for their services, your best bet is to start using these new softwares that are coming out now that can replace, what I'd like to say are bad designers or people who aren't very good at what they do.
Yes. Yes, that's a perfect way to put it. Exactly.
Mhm.
And describe to our listeners what an MVP is.
So an MVP is a minimal viable product. So depending on what your business is, whether it's a product or a service, or if you're in the SaaS space, software as a service, it's basically getting to the very minimum that you can launch with it. But even then, you don't even have to like have a product in hand. It can be a landing page, and then you start marketing and sending people to it to sign up. It really depends on the product or service you're creating. What's the minimal point that you can start sharing it with people and seeing if there's interest for it and validating that idea.
Yeah.
Most people start at the opposite spectrum, which is like I'm working with a woman right now that has been trying for last year to start an olive oil company, importing high-end olive oil from North Africa. And she has gone off the deep end and spent, I think, close to $100,000, like getting stuff sourced and like building apiaries and like investing money into the village. And with the tariffs, her whole business plan just like is starting to go underwater and she needs to repivot. She has money, she'll be fine. But for months, I've been telling her, like, okay, like, let's just get a website up and get people to a newsletter. And like, when you're there, like going through the orchards, like take videos and like actually start like showing people and doing the story behind what you're trying to sell. And it's one of those things, if you went with an MVP, you wouldn't be in this scenario. So it's one of those things that I think a lot of people need to learn, that not everything needs to be perfect. Move light and fast, be able to pivot and figure out, what your customers actually need by giving them something and then getting data back. The most important part of design, branding, marketing is having the data to back up the decisions you're making. And if you don't have data, you can't make informed decisions. So I think that is why everybody should get an MVP going for their business.
Yes, very well said. Without the data and understanding what your market actually is responding to, you're just throwing spaghetti at the wall.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yep. And it sounds like your olive oil customer or client is the same person with the buckets of money who's just dumping it in all of the wrong places.
Yeah. Well, I also feel like in her case, I have known her for a number of years. I had another client that was an olive oil company that she used to be a part of, and then she left after 2 years and she wanted to start her own thing. So she had enough insider knowledge, but not the full picture to be a little dangerous. And I think a lot of new business owners that decide to take that jump from being an employee to starting their new business, they're in that position where they know a little too much, but they don't know what the business side entails. And then they can quickly get into deep water without, a life vest, because they just assume all these things that were being taken care of by the business owner they're working under, and don't calculate for it. And then all of a sudden they're 6 months in their project and they've made no progress because they don't realize that it takes a village to build these things. So being a solopreneur or just starting a business with the hopes of getting employees later on is really a journey in reverse engineering where you want to go. And most people just start going without figuring out where they want to go. Instead, you need to figure out where you are and where you're going and then connect the dots between the two. And a lot of people miss that point. And again, back to what we were saying, like an MVP is where you start figuring out, okay, how do you get from A to B and do that without sinking your ship, metaphorically?
Yes. It sounds like you have to have your compass set in the right direction before you start sailing. Otherwise, you're just going to wander out into the middle of the ocean and then eventually sink all by yourself. It'll be really sad. Don't do that, people. So tell me, growing up, were there any signs that you had this entrepreneurial mindset?
Yeah. I think when I was a little kid, I was very into video games, and there was this one game, I think it's still like on the internet, called RuneScape, and it has like its own economy in it. And I remember as a kid, like having a little like notebook next to me, like, okay, how can I make money in this so I can get all the items and the upgrades? And that transitioned into like when I was a teenager, that being my dad having his own business, I would be like, hey, I want like an Xbox, or like I want like a new pair of shoes or whatever. And like I grew up middle class. So like we had disposable income, but it wasn't enough for me to like get all the things that all the rich kids I went to school had. So I think from the age of 14, I started working with my dad in his carpentry business. So I really have been born into it. I didn't really, there's no story of like the lemonade stand. It was kind of like, hey, my dad has a business and I want money. I might as well go learn how to do that and make whatever minimum wage. And I ended up doing carpentry on and off summers and weekends with my dad from 14 up until 22. So it was a good life skill to learn, but it was one of those things that I think if you are lucky enough to grow up in a family where you have a parent or both your parents run a business, you can be lucky enough, depending on what they do, that you can be incorporated in some way. And a lot of their skills, their mindset on how to run a business kind of trickles down to you. Because I found that was the biggest thing with my father, that a lot of the lessons I hold in business now originally come from him. And like his story was that he started his construction carpentry business at 25 out of necessity that he was working for somebody else. And then my mom and him got together and they got pregnant with me. And he's like, okay, I have another mouth to feed now. I have to make more money than what I was making. And he managed to make it. And he's been a carpenter running his own business for, I think, 32 or 33 years now. But, all those hard lessons he learned in his 20s, we would sit down when I was trying to figure out how to run my own business. And granted, there's a little bit of disconnect because he is still somebody who doesn't embrace the internet. Like I have to teach him how to use his email sometimes, and how to, do certain things for his business. So he can teach me the hard skills or the hard lessons he's had, but it's, soft skills like how to be on line and how to use email and how to do invoicing and this kind of stuff. He still does paper invoices and mails them to people. It was good to learn those things instead of learning it the hard way for myself. So I definitely have to say that was a leg up for me starting my business. Ignorance is bliss. Everybody has to pay off their debt when they're learning something new. And I had less debt to pay off in that sense because I had somebody in my court who could teach me these things.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. And that reminds me of the scenario too of the rich dad, poor dad scenario, because
Yes.
sometimes people don't have we'll call him the rich dad, right? I'm not saying your dad is rich. If he is, great. Sounds like he's middle class. That's fine. But what I mean to say is not everybody has a parent who is entrepreneurial. So they have to learn somewhere else, right? And it's okay to look at other people in your life and emulate them, whether that they are an organic personal connection who you happen to be close with, or maybe you're hiring a business mentor. It's okay to reach out to others who know more than you do. And it sounds like you were able to utilize that resource effectively.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add for people who don't have, somebody in their life already that they can look up to as a mentor. I mean, for everything I couldn't learn from my father or previous people that I worked with, YouTube has been a great learning asset. I would almost recommend, and I know this is kind of like a hot take I have, is that if you want to go into like the creative field or design and you don't necessarily want to put up whatever they're charging now for a degree, and you are motivated, you can learn all this stuff online through YouTube or platforms like Skillshare, and then basically market yourself through social media and not take on, $60,000 to $80,000 for a design degree or whatever you're looking for. I will say, if you're going to be a lawyer, a doctor, or something like that, please go to school. I don't want a surgeon operating on me who learned it on YouTube. That would go wrong in a million ways. But for most fields that don't require a technical degree, YouTube, I think, has better resources because I found, at least in my curriculum I had at the college I went, that a lot of the stuff I learned was 10 years behind the curve. And that when I got out, I had very little knowledge of like how to design for digital, that it was mostly just like a print program that they were teaching how to, do magazines and book binding. And I'm like, okay, in the 5 years I've been running a design business, I've never used my book binding knowledge at all.
Oh, wow. Yeah. No wonder the school closed. Okay.
Yeah.
Understanding. Yeah. And your advice for hopping on YouTube or hopping online somewhere else, Skillshare, it's brilliant because it's true. You have education out there on the internet. Also, within the Adobe programs themselves, there are little snippets that will teach you how to use the program. So I know Adobe has that. I'm sure other design softwares have that. The self-taught method is an effective one. It takes a little bit longer and you're bound to make more mistakes, but you're going to make mistakes anyway in business. You might as well just embrace the funk and enjoy it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the things when you self-teach, you end up learning more than if you were sitting in a classroom going through a textbook or doing a tutorial. Because when you learn by making mistakes and you quickly, like the analogy I always use, like when you're a kid and your mom was cooking on the stove and you reached up and you grabbed the pot, not by the handle, and you burn yourself, like you're never going to make that mistake again. And it's the same way when you start projects. Like my girlfriend just started a new job as a video editor. And she had okay video editing skills, but she wasn't an expert by any means. And I'm not like an expert video editor either. But over the last couple of weeks of her new job, I've been teaching her the tips and tricks I have. And she's like, okay, I'll remember that. And once she started, like she had one project she started, she did it the completely wrong way and she had to turn it in and it ended up being fine. But she's like, I am never going to do a project that way ever again because it caused me so much pain and suffering that that one edit they had that should have taken 3 seconds took 30 minutes because I did it between 3 different programs. And it's like, okay, you learned a lot more by doing it the wrong way, but still accomplishing what you're doing than me showing you how to do it and then not knowing any better.
Yep.
So that's all I really have to say about that is like mistakes are your friend. Failure is your friend. The more attempts you have at something and you fail, the better off you are because you learn a much wider skill set by failing time and time again. And then once you reach success, it's that much sweeter. So
that is the coolest way to reframe failure. I know for me personally, I have a fear of failure. It's very deep. I grew up with a deaf and autistic brother who requires 24/7 care. So I had this weight on my shoulders of knowing that I would be the only sibling, because there are only two of us, me and him. I would be the only person to take care of him after our parents pass away. And so that weight has caused me to create this mindset where I want to do it right the first time, efficiently, effectively, perfectly, so that I can succeed and continue to grow the success and be able to support the both of us, right? And on one hand, that can be really helpful to go in and want to do something well. On the other hand, it's caused me to refrain from making decisions and taking action out of fear of not doing it well the first time. So I've had to work through that and rewire that thinking, because ultimately it's more so not serving me than it is helping me. I think I'm now in a place where I don't need that thinking anymore. What has really helped with that for me has been parenting. Because before I had a baby, I was so afraid of not parenting the right way. I'm doing air quotes right now. The right way to parent, right? I want to be perfect in how I change this diaper and how I reprimand him for doing something that isn't in his best interest or whatever it is, right? I want to be the perfect mom. And what I very quickly found out after having my baby is that thinking actually spiraled me into a depression. I had to deal with postpartum depression, and a way to work back out of that was thankfully through a therapist who reiterated to me like, hey, there is no perfect mom. There is no perfect parent. You're going to make mistakes. Embrace them. And so over the past couple years of having my son, I've been able to practice that every single day. If I say something that isn't the way that I want it to come out to my son, I can tell myself, okay, it's fine. The world isn't going to end. Now I know how I want to rephrase something for the future. And now a quick message from our sponsor. Have you ever been in the middle of a hike, trail run, bike ride, fishing trip, or other sport, but found yourself in pain due to blisters, sore joints, or cold toes and fingers? It's frustrating to have to head back inside when all you want to do is be outside. Dry Mile is built for those who don't want to let the weather or terrain slow them down. Dry Mile's high-performance socks and gloves are engineered for adventurers who demand comfort, durability, and protection in every step and stride. Whether you're traversing rain-soaked trails, tackling your next outdoor challenge, or find yourself in unpredictable conditions, Dry Mile keeps you dry and moving. With moisture-wicking technology, breathable materials, and a rugged design, their gear is built to endure the elements. Don't let discomfort hold you back. Visit drymile.com and get 10% off your order today with coupon code BUB. That's B-U-B. Get out, stay dry, and keep exploring. Dry Mile's got you covered. Thank you for staying with us, and back to the show. That said, is there anything for you and your girlfriend? You've mentioned to me offline that you are planning to build a family. What are some fears that the two of you have in building your family? I know it's a heavy.
I feel like in the last year, well, granted, so we've been together for 4 years and we've had the conversation time and time again about, okay, do we want to have kids? Do we not want to have kids? And we've landed on if everything feels right, yes, we want to have kids, but we're fine not having kids. I also feel like because we're very much high achievers, if we choose to start a family, we want to make sure it's the highest quality it can be. So I think that's our biggest fear, that we would fall into a trap where we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough time, to dedicate both to our careers, but also to raising a child. Like my childhood was very good. I was blessed with parents that stayed married, never had problems. Nobody in my immediate family had, alcohol or drug abuse problems. Like I grew up very blessed in that sense. And then I got older and I saw how a lot of other people's families were. And I realized, okay, I was probably like out of 100 kids, I probably had the good parents. We weren't rich. We didn't have a lot, but what we had was more than enough. And I look back at that and I'm like, okay, there was like one or two times like there was things I wish I had that I couldn't get because we didn't have the resources. But I want to make sure anything I felt was lacking in my childhood, which was very little, that if I have kids, that I can provide for them and give them the best possible case scenario, whether it's never know when you have a kid, it's a gamble, it's a throw of the dice that, they could have a genetic thing or they could be born with some kind of disability that I want to make sure that we are set up for that. Because I do have a friend, just like how you were saying, that her older sister was born with a disability and it absolutely bankrupted their family. And it's just one of those things. I think I tend to be more on the scarcity mindset of like, okay, there's not enough time, there's not enough money, there's not enough resources. Like I need to stockpile as much as I can to make sure if the worst possible thing happens, that I'm still going to come out on the positive side of this thing, that it's not going to ruin my life. But I've never had an instance in my life where everything went terribly and like the ship sank. So I don't quite know where that feeling comes from, but I know, talking with my girlfriend, her upbringing was completely different. That she grew up, both her parents had mental illness. She grew up in a family home, and then she kind of bounced around different places and then managed to go to a private school for high school and then go to a really good college in upstate New York and really dug herself out of a really deep hole that, was just a bad draw of the cards for her. Because like anything, where you're born, what color your skin is, your gender, all that stuff is a lottery. Like you don't get to choose any of that. You're dealt with the hand that you're given. And I think it's just, okay, like I understand my story, but looking at other people's stories, like learning everything I've learned in the last 28 years, how can I best prepare if I want to start a family?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there is a lot of stress there for me. I think even though there shouldn't be, like if we were to have a child tomorrow, like I think we'd be perfectly fine. But I think there's just a lot of pressure, especially on Gen Z and millennials. Like, okay, like the old way of the world and like the perceptions, like, okay, like the husband goes to work and the wife stays at home and cooks and cleans and does all this stuff. Like that doesn't work anymore. Like we both work full time, make a decent salary for both of us, and we still feel like we don't have enough money just because of inflation and economy. And I think that's the biggest thing, that if the economy was a little bit better, or maybe we had a trust fund, like we wouldn't be like worried about this at all. We probably would have a kid right now, in our late 20s. But it's one of those things that, okay, what's the next like life world changing event that's going to happen? Because just since I've been a teenager, we had the housing crash in 2008. Then we had COVID, and now we got everything that's going on in the last year with the government and, the world order and everything. It's like, okay, like how much more is going to happen before the cracks start to show? And by no means am I like a doomsday person, but it's just like, if I'm going to raise a kid in this environment, how can I do it and keep my sanity when two people making over six figures a year are doing well financially, but not well enough to buy a house, have a kid, buy a dog, like just the simple things we were all promised as kids growing up. So
Yeah. No, I feel that in my bones. It's disconcerting to grow up being told that the world works in one certain way, right? You move out at 18, you buy your house in your 20s, you get a good job, after you go to college, and you live the rest of your life at least middle class and
Yep.
happy, right? Whatever, happy, shiny, rainbows, butterflies, happy. And we get out into the world, and it has been different for our generation. Our generation, I'm millennial, and we have to think about the way that we handle our finances very differently than I believe that our parents had to, although it is all subjective and in proportion, right? So house prices for our parents, I'd say specifically for my parents, it was less than six figures. You could
Oh yeah.
buy a 2-story house for less than 6 figures. That's just insanity to me thinking about it, because now it's more than quadruple that price
Hmm.
in our area. I'm in Southern California. And yet back then, even though the house price was 25% of what they cost now, salaries were also less than. I don't think they were 25% of what they were
Hmm.
now, because I don't think that the salary is keeping up with inflation. But there was still that proportional difference. And so I remember that anytime I think about how are we going to survive? Are we going to have enough money? Well, it's like, look, if my parents could do it, and if my grandparents could do it, and if my great grandparents could do it, then I can do it too. And I'm not saying this to like mentor you or anything, but I do want to shed a little bit of hope. And
Yeah.
I don't know, that's what I'm finding as a parent. All of my fears that were really ingrained deep within me, the perfectionism. I also had a fear of not having enough money and not enough
Hmm.
resources. I've found that, gosh, despite those fears, we're still okay. We're
Yeah.
still okay. And it's so funny that actually cropped up last night. I was talking to my husband about baby number 2. We're thinking about expanding our family. We'll see if it happens, right? But I vocalized that fear again. I was like, honey, what if it's so much more expensive? And I just started like spiraling, going down the rabbit hole. He's like, have you not learned from baby number 1? We're fine. Everything has
Hmm.
been fine. Yeah, the world is terrifying right now. There's no doubt about that. And
Yeah.
also, we have the ability to adapt. That is something that we are very strong in being able to do. And especially as an entrepreneur, you have to be
Mhm.
able to adapt.
Exactly. If you don't know how to pivot, you can't, keep growing your business, especially with how everything's been the last couple of years. I think everybody's had to pivot close to a half a dozen times at this point.
Yeah. Oh my
But to
goodness.
to touch on something you were saying earlier, and I think this is important to note, that the stress and the pain everybody feels and the problems they face are relative. So somebody
Mhm.
may be watching this and may have a very easy life, but they're going through something that seems very minute to somebody else. Like the hardest thing you're going through is the hardest thing you're going through,
Yep.
and it's all relative. So I think
Yep.
that's the biggest thing, that if you are looking at your life and you feel like, oh, I don't have any big struggle, or I don't have any big reason to be anxious or sad or whatever, like for you, if that's the toughest thing you've dealt with in the last year, you're, entitled to feel how you feel in that case.
That's a very important point. It's important that we don't look sideways, compare our lives to other people, whether
Mhm.
we have it better, whether we have it worse. It's all subjective. At the end of the day, when we feel like we have an issue, then we have an issue, and it's something
Mhm.
to work through, and that's okay. It's okay. And yeah, I don't know. I think it's really easy, especially our generation, being in the social media age and in a space where everything is online, everybody's highlight reels are one swipe away. It's really easy to compare our lives to other people and get lost in
Exactly.
the sauce.
Mhm. I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah. Well, what is your number one dream for your business? At this point, you have been in business for 5 amazing years. That's something to be very proud of.
Mhm.
Where do you hope that it will take you in the future?
So I'm currently going through a transition, moving away from doing done for you service as a graphic designer to doing more of teaching people how to create a personal brand and start an online business. So like my big goal with that is to have more time freedom, more passive income, basically take all the knowledge I've accrued in the last 5 years and put that into products and courses and videos and stuff that people can consume for a fraction of what hiring me to do it for them would. So they can kind of take back the power, but also they don't have to spend a couple $1,000s to have somebody do it for them and then not know what it does or like how it affects your business. So that's like the biggest goal for me right now, is to like take everything that's in here and put
Yep.
it in a form that is consumable for somebody who just graduated college yesterday and says, hey, I don't want to be an employee. The entrepreneurship, like this is another route I can take. To what we've been speaking about here, like so being a solopreneur, being a business owner, not having any employees, it seems to be the newest trend moving forward. Yes, because of the economy and inflation, but also because there's so many tools and software now that can replace, entry level employees or like freelancers or contractors, that, if you have a good understanding of how, prompting works for AI, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or any of the new stuff that's come out, you can get back to that minimal viable product idea we had earlier and get something launched in a weekend and start making money in the first 30 days. So that's really my goal now, is to say, okay, everything I've learned about branding online business, how do we turn that into something that can serve those people who can't afford the experts now, get them to a point where they're making enough money and they need that expert help, that they can then come back and hire people like you and I to help them elevate their business from, if they're making 6 figures, up to 7 or 8 figures, whatever their goal is, really.
I love that. That is so cool. Are the courses online yet, or are they in process? Can people find them?
So I have 3 things. One being, about 2 years ago, I made a master freelancing course that basically took everything I learned in my first 3 years of running a freelance business as a designer, and I just put that in an 8-hour course. I do have that on my website. So if you go to my website and go to my guide section, you can watch all 8 hours of it there. That was my first attempt at doing a digital product. And there was a lot I didn't know with it. It's a great resource, but I don't charge for it because I've grown from there. And then the 2 other products I have that I'm selling are 2 guided Notion workspaces. One being a personal brand launch kit. So it basically guides you through how to launch your personal brand in the first 30 days. It basically takes all the, tools, onboarding forms, questionnaires I've used in my own branding business for the last 5 years. And basically I give it to you and say, I think there's 10 YouTube videos in that guide that basically walks you through as if I was in the room next to you, okay, this is how you're going to figure out your brand positioning. This is your target audience. And then the second product I offer is a personal brand design kit. So again, it's a Notion guided thing, and you just go through. It teaches you how to design a logo, pick your brand fonts, brand colors, all through Canva. That way it's accessible to somebody who has 0 design expertise. And there's lessons in there from me basically teaching you okay, how do you design a simple and effective logo? Okay, how do you do this in Canva? Why less is more in logo design? What scalability is? Basically breaking down fonts, all that stuff, all the stuff you and I try to explain to clients when we work with them. And then they say, make the logo bigger. Hey, take this thing and not make it my brand color. That product basically breaks that down to where you can have a halfway decent brand without having to spend any money. That way you can get to your MVP, get your business going in a weekend, and start making your first $1,000 online within 30 days.
That's amazing. Those resources sound so helpful for somebody who's just getting started and they want to get off the ground. Where, if someone wants to get a hold of you, how can they find you online and get in touch?
Yeah. So online everywhere, I'm just at Nikolai Paquin. My name is here, just no space between it. You can find all those products and resources on my website. As for social media, I am on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram. I sometimes post on TikTok, but I'm primarily on LinkedIn and YouTube. And as for the free resources and videos that I create, they go on YouTube. And then I have my own newsletter that I publish once a week called Expert Economics. And that's basically everything I've been talking about with you today. I'm wrapped up in a weekly newsletter. I send you a guide every week that basically breaks down, okay, you're a new solopreneur. Here's something that you should know and how you can implement it in your business. Typically, the newsletters are anywhere between 1,500 to 3,000 words. So they can be scratching the surface or they can be a deep dive. And I always try to do a YouTube video with the newsletter. So if you don't want to read, you can go watch the video version of that.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time today. You've taught us so many good things.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for having me on. It was a great conversation.
Thank you for joining us on Bringing Up Business. If you could, please take a moment to subscribe to and rate the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow us on Instagram at bub.podcast. That's BUB.podcast. Finally, we'd love to get your feedback. If you have a comment or a guest idea, please let us know on our website, bringingupbusiness.com. Until next time, thanks for joining us. Say bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Say bye-bye. See you later.
Bye-bye. See you later.
This recording is for informational purposes only and should not be considered business advice. Opinions expressed are as of the date of recording and are subject to change without notice. The views and opinions of guests on this program are not necessarily those of Umari Digital and its affiliates, which together we refer to as Umari Digital. Umari Digital is not affiliated with guests or their business affiliates unless otherwise stated. Umari Digital does not guarantee the accuracy or the completeness of the data presented herein. This recording is for informational purposes only, and the information, data, analysis, or opinion it includes or their use should not be considered business, financial, or legal advice. Umari Digital shall not be responsible for any decisions, damages, or other losses resulting from or related to the information, data, analysis, or opinions or their use. All business decisions are subject to risk, including possible loss of capital. Individuals should seriously consider if a decision is suitable for them by referencing their own financial position. Thank you.